Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump taking executive action today to lower drug prices and prevent illegal immigrants from getting Social Security benefits. Iris Tsao is at the White House for us with more on the president's actions and his latest message to communist China. Trump is threatening to revoke Harvard's tax-exempt status if the university refuses to implement policy changes on campus. That's after the federal government already froze more than $2 billion in funding for Harvard. Tens of thousands of immigrants from 2 countries are now facing deportation in the coming months. Jason Blair has the latest. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the Gaza Strip as operations continue. Meanwhile, the State Department announces when the next nuclear talks with Iran will take place, but not where. Jason Perry reports. Russia and Ukraine continue trading attacks, reportedly causing numerous civilian casualties. Arian Pazdar has what the U.S. says about ending the fighting once and for all. In day 2 of testimony, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg spars with a government attorney in the antitrust trial against the company. Arlene Richards with the key takeaways.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Maher.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President Trump says the ball is in China's court amid new escalation of trade tensions. He's also signed a memorandum today to stop illegal immigrants from getting Social Security benefits. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tsao. Good evening, Iris. What is the latest at the White House today?
Good evening to you as well, Tiff. The White House is telling China again today that it should reach out and make a deal. That's as the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt today read out a statement from President Trump today to China, saying that the ball is now in China's court. Watch.
I do have an additional statement that he just shared with me in the Oval Office. The ball is in China's court. China needs to make a deal with us. We don't have to make a deal with them. There's no difference between China and any other country except they are much larger. And China wants what we have, what every country wants, what we have, the American consumer. Or to put it another way, they need our money.
China recently retaliated back at the U.S. by imposing 125% tariffs on U.S. goods. And that's after President Trump last week announced that he's hiking tariffs on Chinese goods to 145%. And Trump this morning in the Truth Social post again criticized China for, quote, was being brutal to our farmers. He also criticized China for backing out of a deal to buy Boeing aircraft in this latest retaliation effort. Meanwhile, on domestic policy today, President Trump signed a presidential memorandum to prevent illegal immigrants from getting Social Security benefits and to expand investigation into potential fraud. It comes as allegations are rising over, for example, people over 100 years old were still getting those benefits. Watch.
He will always protect that program. He campaigned on it, he protected it in his first term, and he's back again to continue protecting it.
And this comes as President Biden today is speaking about the state of Social Security benefits during the current Trump term. The White House stressing that President Trump will protect the benefits for those legal and lawful American citizens who have been contributing to the program. And today, President Trump also signed an executive order seeking to allow Medicare to directly negotiate prescription drug prices. The White House says that will lower drug prices for seniors who rely on the program. But ultimately, the action will require congressional approval. Back to you.
All right, Iris, thanks for those updates. And in a Truth Social post today, Trump wrote that Harvard University could lose its tax-exempt status and be taxed as a political entity. He said that's if the school keeps pushing what he called political, ideological, and terrorist-inspired content. The comments come after the Trump administration froze more than $2 billion in funding for Harvard over its refusal to implement policy changes. Here's White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt responding to questions from reporters about that move.
When it comes to Harvard, the president's position on this is grounded in common sense, in the basic principle that Jewish American students, or students of any faith, should not be illegally harassed and targeted on our nation's college campuses. And we unfortunately saw that illegal discrimination take place on the campus of Harvard. There are countless examples to prove it, particularly with the stunning confession by then Harvard President Claudine Gay, who said that bullying and harassment depended on the context. The president at that time made it clear to the American public he was not going to tolerate illegal harassment and anti-Semitism taking place in violations of federal law. So the president made it clear to Harvard, follow federal law, no longer break Title VI, which was passed by Congress to ensure no student can be discriminated against on the basis of race, and you will receive federal funding. Unfortunately, Harvard has not taken the president or the administration's demands seriously. All the president is asking, don't break federal law, and then you can have your federal funding. I think the president is also begging a good question. More than $2 billion out the door to Harvard when they have a more than $50 billion endowment. Why are the American taxpayers subsidizing a university that has billions of dollars in the bank already? And we certainly should not be funding a place where such grave anti-Semitism exists.
Harvard accuses the Trump administration of trying to curtail academic freedom. Here's more on that story.
The federal government announced Monday it was freezing $2.2 billion in grants and $60 million in contracts to Harvard University. This comes after the Ivy League school said it would reject the government's demands for policy changes. Harvard's president Alan Garber wrote Monday the university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. The Department of Education's task force to combat anti-Semitism then released a statement announcing the funding freeze. The task force said Harvard's refusal to comply shows a mindset, quote, that federal investment does not come with the responsibility to uphold civil rights laws. Some of the demands the government made to Harvard and several other prestigious schools include eliminating DEI programs, banning masks at campus protests, and limiting the power held by some faculty members. It also mandates that admissions and hiring processes prioritize merit over race and gender-based criteria. In a letter last week, the Trump administration told Harvard to screen out international applicants deemed, quote, hostile to American values or supportive of terrorism. It also demanded an audit of programs at the school's Center for Middle Eastern Studies to root out any faculty who, quote, discriminated against Jewish or Israeli students or incited students to violate Harvard's rules. Garber's response was that no government should dictate what private universities can teach, who they can admit or hire, and which areas of study and inquiry they can pursue. He said Harvard already made extensive reforms to address anti-Semitism. As early as Friday, the Harvard chapter of the American Association of University Professors filed a lawsuit to block the government from cutting funding, saying a freeze was imminent. Last month, Columbia University received a similar list of demands with nearly $5 billion in funding on the line. Unlike Harvard, it agreed to nearly every demand, though the funds remain frozen at this time.
The Department of Homeland Security says it will revoke the protected status of thousands of Afghan and Cameroonian immigrants. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the update.
DHS Secretary Kristi Noem says they are going to update the temporary protection status, or TPS status, for Afghanistan and Cameroon. This move will affect approximately 14,600 Afghan immigrants starting in May and approximately 7,900 immigrants from Cameroon starting in June. Secretary Kristi Noem says that Cameroon and Afghanistan no longer meet the requirements for TPS status, and this is following a review by the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. TPS status allows for immigrants from countries affected by armed conflict, natural disasters, or other extraordinary events to stay in the U.S. temporarily. In response, Global Refuge, a nonprofit refugee resettlement agency, did respond with a statement against the move. The president and CEO said Afghanistan today is still reeling from Taliban rule, economic collapse, and humanitarian disaster. Forcing them back where they face systemic oppression and gender-based violence would be an utterly unconscionable stain on our nation's reputation. And in related news, a federal judge ruled that the DHS at this time can't revoke parole and work authorization status given to non-citizens under the Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela program during President Joe Biden's term, and that the government must take each of these on a case-by-case basis. The judge said in the ruling, if their parole status is allowed to lapse, Plaintiffs will be faced with two unfavorable options: continue following the law and leave the country on their own, or await removal proceedings. If plaintiffs leave the country on their own, they will face dangers in their native countries as set forth in their affidavits. For some plaintiffs, leaving will also cause family separation. DHS Secretary Newsom announced back in March that the department would be implementing this change, and this, as well as the TPS status change, are in part of President Trump's initiative to secure the border, as well as review immigration programs that they say no longer serve the nation's interest. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Israeli forces report killing a Hamas commander in the Gaza Strip, saying he was the fifth person killed who held the position. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department says the second round of talks on a possible nuclear deal with Iran will take place Saturday. NTD's Jason Perry has the update.
Residents in the Gaza Strip on Tuesday were seen inspecting the damage from an Israeli airstrike. The strike hit in Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip, in an area where displaced residents were living in tents.
At around exactly 12 midnight, a missile fell on this tent. We were surprised to find that this area is not safe. There is no safe place in the Gaza Strip.
And in the Shajaya area of the northern Gaza Strip, Israeli forces reported killing a Hamas company commander who was responsible for issuing weapons to terrorists in the group. Israel said he was the fifth person killed who held that position. Israel's chief of the general staff was also in Shajaya on Tuesday, where he visited reserve soldiers. He thanked them for their efforts, and he also approved plans to continue operations there. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz were also in the Gaza Strip on Tuesday.
The operation that is currently taking place is pressuring Hamas to first release the hostages. And the more it persists in its refusal, the more we will intensify the blows.
Meanwhile, Netanyahu gave a message about Iran.
This is a post that the dictator of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, released today, in which he explains why Israel must be destroyed. He is doing this during negotiations with the Americans. We are fighting for our existence. We are fighting for our future.
Iran's supreme leader also addressed the ongoing talks with the U.S. on a possible nuclear deal, saying Iran is, quote, neither overly optimistic nor overly pessimistic. Also commenting on the nuclear talks, State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce appeared to draw a line between what is said in public and in private.
When things are being said in the moment, in public, you must consider that that's not part of how they negotiate. I would say what matters is an end result, our parties agreeing, papers being signed. It is not what people say, but the actions they take.
She also said the next round of talks between the U.S. and Iran will take place next Saturday, but didn't say where. This comes as the United States military continues to battle the Iran-backed Houthi terrorist group in Yemen. In a post on X, the United States Central Command says they're conducting 24/7 strikes against multiple Iran-backed Houthi locations. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Ukraine reportedly attacked Russia's Kursk region overnight, just one day after a deadly attack by Moscow. The U.S. is now highlighting the importance for both sides to show they actually want to end the fighting. NTD's international correspondent Ariane Pozdar has the war update.
Sirens could be heard in Russia's Kursk region as Ukraine reportedly attacked with dozens of drones. Russian officials say the attack killed an elderly woman, injured 9 people, and ignited fires in several buildings. A spokesperson for Russia's investigative committee commented on Tuesday.
Ukrainian militants massively attacked residential buildings in the city of Kursk tonight. A drone also hit an ambulance station.
The reported attack comes just one day after Russian strikes reportedly killed 35 civilians in Ukraine on Palm Sunday. On Tuesday, the State Department again said that talks to end the fighting once and for all can take place only when both sides show they're willing to enter a ceasefire first.
After Palm Sunday, it's clearly a dynamic where there have to be more questions about the nature of who's really committed to peace and a ceasefire.
Meanwhile, in Ukraine, NATO's Secretary General Mark Rutte is visiting the southern city of Odessa. While meeting Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Rutte discussed the peace talks led by the US.
These discussions are not easy, not least in the wake of this horrific violence. But we all support President Trump's push for peace.
President Trump has been trying to implement a full ceasefire in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So far, the two sides have agreed only to a limited truce on energy and infrastructure for 30 days. The White House expressed agreement with the State Department on Tuesday, saying it's crucial for both sides to enter a full ceasefire.
There is incentive for Russia to end this war, and perhaps that could be economic partnerships with the United States, but we need to see a ceasefire first.
On Tuesday, Russia said there's no clear outline of a peace agreement yet.
But there's a political will to move towards this agreement. And I repeat once again, we highly appreciate the constructive and meaningful contacts we had with the U.S.
On Monday, Trump once again highlighted the need to stop the killing and bring an end to the conflict. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
In Meta courtroom action today, the federal government presented an email that appears to show that CEO Mark Zuckerberg considered ways to avoid an antitrust lawsuit. This comes during Zuckerberg's second day of testimony. NTD's legal correspondent Arlene Richards has more details.
On day 2 of the Federal Trade Commission's antitrust lawsuit against Meta, a government attorney presented an email from May 2018. In it, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg appeared to comment on possibly separating the Instagram app his company purchased in 2012. The information is key to the government's case as they are alleging that Meta operates an illegal monopoly. More specifically, the government is accusing the company of buying Instagram and WhatsApp, two social media powerhouses, to squash the competition and eliminate rivals. Zuckerberg wrote in the email, as calls to break up the big tech companies grow, there is a non-trivial chance that we will be forced to spin out Instagram and perhaps WhatsApp in the next 5 to 10 years anyway. This is one more factor we should consider. But Zuckerberg, in testimony Tuesday, pushed back, saying he also had many conversations about how excited his company was to acquire Instagram to make a better product. The government attorney, Daniel Matheson, suggested he bought Instagram because he saw it as a threat to his company. Zuckerberg replied, "I think that mischaracterizes what the email was." He also said that buying the company and building their own version of it was a reasonable thing to do. The case is part of a crackdown on big tech that started during the first Trump administration when Meta was still called Facebook. Purchasing WhatsApp and Instagram more than 10 years ago helped Facebook remain popular with younger generations as rivals like Snapchat and TikTok emerged. The company said in a statement that the competitive landscape has shifted dramatically since then and that the government will have to show it holds a monopoly in the current market. Some experts have said it will be an uphill battle for the FTC to prove its case, saying the market has evolved significantly since Meta acquired those apps. Amazon, Apple, and Alphabet's Google also face similar lawsuits by U.S. antitrust enforcers. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Coming up, a group of small U.S. businesses is suing the Trump administration over the sweeping new tariffs. Chris Spears spoke with a business law professor about the legal battle and what gives a president the power to impose tariffs in the first place. And California is launching a new campaign to further strengthen tourism between California and Canada. The effort follows a drop in visitors and concerns over travel impacting tariffs. That and more after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Maher. A group of small U.S. businesses fighting back against President Trump's tariff authority. On Monday, the Liberty Justice Center filed a lawsuit in the U.S. Court of International Trade. The suit argues Trump's tariffs are illegal under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The legal advocacy group is representing 5 small businesses that claim they've been severely harmed by the tariffs. The lawsuit states the IEEPA gives the president authority to impose emergency economic powers in response to a threat to national security or the economy. But the group believes Trump's criteria in this case have not been met. Monday's complaint also alleges the law doesn't allow the president to unilaterally impose tariffs. NTD's Chris Beers reports on the legal basis for the tariffs at issue in this lawsuit.
It's no surprise the sweeping new reciprocal tariffs are facing lawsuits. The levies placed on all nations ranged from 10 to 50% when announced. They've since been reduced to 10% for every country except China. But they still erased months of stock market gains and could increase prices for U.S. consumers and businesses. What is the legal basis for these tariffs in the first place?
The International Economic Emergency Powers Act is a statute that allows the president, upon making a determination that of an unusual and extraordinary threat, to take action, for example, tariff action or trade action that allows, for example, the president, or would allow the president to adjust tariffs.
Professor Corrales says the president has invoked the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, or IEPA, for two tariff actions.
Both the fentanyl tariffs that he imposed on Canada, Mexico, and China, and for because of the trade deficit.
Now the Liberty Justice Center is suing the Trump administration based on its use of the IEPA law to justify these tariffs.
The Liberty Justice Center is questioning the president's determination under the IEPA statute by saying that trade deficits have always been, the United States has faced trade deficits for a long time. They're not an emergency.
The administration's likely response?
Of course, this is an unusual situation. Not only our trade deficit has been piling up, it's cumulative over years. There's a cumulative effect on deindustrialization. We face a number of threats from, most specifically, China, Iran, etc. We need to build a bigger navy. We need to take action.
This lawsuit was filed in the Court of International Trade. Corrales doesn't think the court will take this challenge.
They haven't, granted these types of requests in the past, because they know the president has authority under the statute.
The IEPA statute is the basis for the new reciprocal tariffs, but something called Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act is the basis for President Trump's sector-specific tariffs on steel, aluminum, and cars. Section 232 allows the president to use tariffs for national security reasons, like ensuring the country isn't reliant on adversaries for defense industry materials. Professor Corrales says tariffs based on this statute are likely to endure any legal challenges.
As far as I know, nobody's challenging the president's authority there. And the president has already won these cases in the first administration. And so the tariffs are likely to stay.
The Trump administration is in the planning stage of implementing semiconductor and pharmaceutical tariffs, also based on Section 232. Chris Beers, NTD News.
California Governor Gavin Newsom launched an international campaign to welcome and encourage Canadians to visit the Golden State. He aims to revive international travel, which has dropped since President Trump's tariff policies took effect.
The Golden State and Canada have always shared so much in common. Sure, you know who's trying to stir things up back in D.C., but don't let that ruin your beach plans. California, it's the ultimate playground. 2,000 miles from Washington and a world away in mindset. From our iconic beaches and national parks to world-class wine, food, and outdoor adventure, there's something here for everyone. Last year, nearly 2 million Canadians visited California because here in California, we've got plenty of sunshine and a whole lot of love for our neighbors up north.
The campaign is being launched with help from the nonprofit group Visit California. It mirrors Newsom's recent request for other countries not to raise tariffs on California products. Newsom's office says tourism has dropped to its lowest point since the COVID-19 pandemic. In February, visits from Canada were down 12% compared to the year before. That number is expected to rise if tariffs stay in place. The upcoming campaign will build on Visit California's $5.2 million yearly marketing investment in Canada. Coming up, the U.S. is cutting over $200 million in grants at the State Department. Secretary Marco Rubio says the cuts were, quote, misguided programs. That says China retaliates against U.S. officials over a new policy on Tibet. Jack Bradley reports. And a new report warns that China's withholding of rare earth supplies could harm America's defense capabilities. That's as President Trump signs an executive order launching a probe into the national security risks of relying on imported critical minerals. An energy policy analyst joins us to discuss after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Maher. The State Department is announcing more cuts to its agencies, this time canceling millions of dollars in grants to overseas programs. This as the Chinese regime retaliates against the U.S. over its new policy on Tibet. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
The State Department, the arm of the executive branch that directly engages other countries, they just announced they're canceling nearly 140 grants worth nearly $215 million. And take a look at this post on X from Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying that the taxpayer-funded grants were going to what he calls misguided programs. He mentioned specifically programs like this one in Lebanon called Building the Migrant Domestic Worker-Led Movement, and also Get the Trolls Out in the United Kingdom. And regarding the Trump administration's tariffs, State Department spokeswoman Tammy Bruce called these policies a great reset to the world economy.
President Trump is the only person that can undo the Leviathan that this trade framework became around the world, and he's doing it. And I've been watching this coverage, the pearl clutching. It's been remarkable. This is going to be one of the greatest resets of many resets that the Trump administration has implemented, and it's going to make a difference not just for the American people, but for all those countries that realize that this has to change.
This comes as the U.S. tariffs on China total 145%, while China has tariffs on the U.S. at 125%. Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party is placing a new round of visa restrictions on U.S. officials. Here's why. About 2 weeks ago, the U.S. put visa restrictions on Chinese officials who restrict foreign access to Tibet. That's because the Chinese regime denies U.S. diplomats and journalists access to Tibet. So U.S. diplomats cannot help U.S. citizens traveling in Tibet with things they normally help with, like helping obtain a passport, emergency aid, or legal support. All the while, the U.S. allows Chinese diplomats and journalists broad access in the U.S. According to a 2023 State Department report, U.S. diplomats made 3 requests for official travel to the Tibetan region, but were denied each time. The CCP invaded Tibet in 1949, turning the region into a surveillance state with multiple labor camps. A March report by the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom said that the CCP is committing cultural genocide against Tibetan Buddhists. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Earlier this month, China imposed export restrictions on 7 rare earth elements and magnets in response to President Trump's tariff increases on Chinese products. That move could harm America's military capabilities, according to a report by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS. The report notes that the U.S. is particularly vulnerable in these supply chains and may struggle to replace those minerals, which are used for a range of defense technologies, fighter jets, submarines, missiles, radar systems, and more. Beijing currently holds a near monopoly on the supply of rare earth metals. And today, President Trump signed an executive order launching an investigation into the national security risks of relying on imported critical minerals. Joining us now to discuss is energy policy analyst and consultant David Blackman. He's a 40-year-old veteran of the oil and gas industry. David, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. Now, to begin, what do you make of the CSIS warning here that Beijing's withholding of those rare earth minerals could threaten Washington's war footing?
Well, I think it's entirely accurate. This is a known problem for years now, going back at least 30 years. We don't produce these kinds of minerals in our country now. We don't mine for them, even though we have large known deposits around the country. We kind of got out of the mining business. It was a conscious decision during the 70s and 80s, and farmed it all out to China and other developing nations. And so we don't produce them here. We don't refine and process them here. And that's really the most critical thing I think the Trump administration is going to find in its study, is that we have no capability to refine these metals into usable products once they're mined. That's all done in China now. So regardless of where you see metals produced, they're put on a ship, they go to China to be refined, and China controls the supply chain for them. That's a huge national security risk. President Biden actually made a major speech on it in July of 2021, committed his government to a whole of government effort to onshore these supply chains. And he really didn't accomplish much in that regard. And so now the Trump administration has inherited it, and it's become, as you mentioned, a pretty significant issue now.
Expanding on that, when it comes to mining and refining, it does seem President Trump has begun taking actions to increase American mineral production to counter Beijing's monopoly of the sector. But given China's control of the sector, what feasible options does the U.S. have in terms of mining and refining?
Well, in terms of refining, I suspect we will see the president, after this study is done, declare a national emergency and invoke the Defense Production Act to kind of fast track the production or the creation of a refining capability here in the United States, just as he did during the COVID crisis. You know, he invoked the Defense Production Act to encourage the rapid manufacturing of masks and other protective gear that we all thought we needed in that pandemic. And so that's going to happen, because it doesn't matter if you can get the mineral supply if you can't refine it. And that's going to be the central issue on this. And it's of course, you know, I think obtaining a supply of it is a big piece of why President Trump has been so focused on Greenland, because the largest known single deposit of rare earth minerals is on the southwestern coast of Greenland. And there is actually a mine there ready to go if it can be, as soon as the Greenland government decides to lift restrictions on its activity. So I think that's a big motivator where Greenland's concerned, but you're always going to have this problem of you can't just put it on a ship to China if you want to free your supply chain from China.
Now, another angle seems to be the Democratic Republic of the Congo. While China currently owns or controls the vast majority of the Congo mines there, the cobalt mines there, the Congo government has reached out to the U.S. for help in countering rebel forces in the region. That's as the country has about $20 trillion worth of resources, including rare earths, according to the Congo-based Ponzi Foundation. Now, Trump's Africa envoy has laid the groundwork for such a deal there. What would that mean for the U.S.-China competition over rare earths?
Well, I'm not sure what it would mean for rare earths. They do have known deposits there. I'm not sure there are active mining operations for those rare earths there in Congo. I haven't studied that issue in depth. I mean, if there are active mines that China doesn't control, then obviously the U.S. could potentially make a deal related to those in exchange for military and aid support for their government's needs. And that could be another, ready solution, at least to the supply piece of the thing.
Now, it seems it's not just rare earth elsewhere in the energy sector. OPEC is saying tariffs could reduce demand for oil. What do you make of that argument? How would that translate into the consumer world?
Well, it could translate into lower oil prices. Already has, actually. We've had about an 8% drop in oil prices since President Trump started making these announcements on tariffs on April 2nd. But it's based on the assumption that we're going to have an economic slowdown. And I think that's kind of the common wisdom that's out there right now, but it's certainly not baked into the cake. And as we saw last week, we had very strong jobs report, really strong inflation reports out of the federal government. And if you don't have an economic slowdown, then you're not going to have a slowdown in demand growth for crude oil, and you'd probably see prices strengthen up. But right now, we've had a significant drop in prices, and that will, make its way into the gasoline prices probably late this week or early next week.
A lot of developments in this sector for sure. David Blackman, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
A cordial exchange between one of the world's most powerful men and his critic. After a meeting with President Trump at the White House, comedian talk show host Bill Maher last week praised the president for being, quote, gracious and measured. What do everyday folks make of their exchange? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from them.
So Bill Maher was at the White House meeting with President Trump, and he said this whole exchange was pretty cordial.
So meet up in person. Maybe it'll be different. Spoiler alert, it was.
So what do you make of this whole conversation between the two?
I like the idea of the Democrats and Republicans getting together and having a cordial conversation. So I thought it was an awesome idea.
That's where we need to keep going, is keep the communication open. Doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on.
You never know where Bill Maher's at, you know. It's gone from the left to the right, maybe back again, I don't know. I wish they'd kind of stay in their place, obviously, in the TV and let the government do what the government needs to do.
I think that's great. I think that's what we need to do. We need to be at a point where we can come together. We need to stop the us and the they and the them. And that's the only way we're going to move forward.
I've had so many conversations with prominent people who are much less connected, people who don't look you in the eye, people who don't really listen because they just want to get to their next thing. None of that with him. And he mostly steered the conversation to, what do you think about this?
What can the country learn from this exchange, especially given the current political climate we're in right now?
I hope that two people with differing views can actually come to the table and start having conversations.
Be respectful of each other, and let's just forge ahead and try to find a compromise.
Everything I've ever not liked about him was, I swear to God, absent, at least on this night with this guy.
Yeah, I mean, we can't just say we're going to go one way without at least looking at the other side and giving it a chance, right? Seems to be this side that's able to do that, not necessarily the other side.
You know, both parties have to work together, and over the last 4 years or even 6 years, you know, that it just seems to get tougher and tougher for them to agree on anything.
They don't listen to each other anymore, and they don't try to understand. And what kind of a message are we sending to our children? Not a very strong, positive one at all.
Everybody has common ground in that everybody can have a good conversation without yelling and get some ideas across.
Coming up, from the Pacific Coast to movie backlots, the organizing committee for the 2028 Olympics are mapping out stages for the Los Angeles Games. LA 28 announced new venues, with some events taking athletes far beyond the city. Christina Corona reports. And in the NBA, the play-in round begins tonight. Will Steph Curry and Golden State advance? Dave Martin joins us to discuss when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Maher. A list of venues for the 2028 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles was released today. LA 28 announced locations for more than a dozen sports, including beach volleyball, surfing, and baseball. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
LA 28 just unveiled new venues for the 2028 Olympics, where games will unfold across historic stadiums, California's iconic beaches, and even legendary Hollywood backdrops. Organizers say they want to give athletes and fans an unforgettable experience. LA 28 announced that all of the baseball games will be played at Dodger Stadium, where it will return for the first time since the 1984 exhibition games. Beach volleyball is set for Long Beach, while surfing will take place off the San Clemente coast. Squash will make its Olympic debut at one of Hollywood's most iconic backdrops, the Courthouse Square on the Universal Studios lot, known for films like Back to the Future and To Kill a Mockingbird. New additions include venues in Venice, downtown LA, Carson, Anaheim, and the San Fernando Valley. Previously announced sites include the LA Memorial Coliseum, BMO Stadium, and Crypto.com Arena. Some events will be held outside LA, like softball and canoe slalom in Oklahoma City. Shotgun shooting events will be held at the Shotgun Center here in South El Monte. Reporting from the city of El Monte, Christina Corona, NTD News.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty going on today, but let's start in the WNBA, as last night the league held their annual draft with UConn star Paige Bueckers going #1 overall to the Dallas Wings. Was there any question they would take her?
Yeah, no question. I mean, the team won the draft lottery back in November to give them the first overall pick. General manager Kurt Miller said it was Paige early on, so they went with her. Now here's what Paige had to say after she was taken last night.
You don't ever want to assume anything in life. Nothing is guaranteed. Sort of for this moment to be here, and it actually happened. It's nerve-wracking. You just have a level of excitement, nervousness, bittersweet feeling knowing that my journey at UConn's over, but excited for the next one to begin. So, and to be able to share that moment with the people sitting at my table and also the people not sitting at my table, they played a huge role in it. Just happiness and joy.
Yeah, her career ended just a week ago when she led the UConn to the national title over South Carolina. She was actually a three-time All-American there at UConn, sixth UConn player to be picked #1 overall. Now, her WNBA career starts immediately, almost. The preseason starts May 2nd, the regular season starts May 15th, so not much off-season here for these college players.
They're busy for sure. While looking at college football news, the White House welcomed the national champion Ohio State Buckeye football team to the White House yesterday. Unfortunately, Vice President J.D. Vance had an issue handling the championship.
Yeah, you know, the way this was reported, you would have thought he dropped the trophy. That was the impression I got. But when you see the actual video of him playing here, now there's the base there, and they pick it up, and you can see there's a bit of an issue. The base, the trophy holder really falls to the ground. Then they put the trophy back in, but the trophy doesn't actually hit the ground. It looks like those things aren't even supposed to be connected there. As you can see, Ryan Day, the head coach, coming over. Everyone's sharing some laughs there. Now, J.D. Vance is an Ohio State alum, so obviously he's very happy to have, you know, his team back here. I mean, if I was picking it up, I think I would probably end up dropping that too. See, if it probably was me, that would drop the trophy as well. That's why nobody gives me trophies like this to pick up. But anyway, the Philadelphia Phillies, who won the Super Bowl, they will be visiting the White House later this month. I'm sure Vance is probably still going to be razzed about that when they bring out the Lombardi trophy, but that's what's going on there anyway.
The best part was President Trump's face. He made a funny reaction.
I didn't even notice that part.
He knows TV for sure. Well, shifting gears to baseball, Philadelphia Phillies star Bryce Harper was hit with a baby blue painted bat yesterday. That was part of a gender reveal for him and his wife's fourth child.
Yeah, he found out just before going to the plate that it was going to be a boy. Now, Harper had a pink bat and a blue bat delivered to the stadium, not knowing which he would need. Now, he had a teammate help him out. His teammate actually was Trey Turner, who got a text message just before Harper was going to the plate, telling him which bat to give Harper. So he found out when everybody else did that he was getting a boy. Now, Turner actually had a little bit of fun with him, taking out the pink bat and taking a few swings with it before giving him the blue bat. Now, unfortunately for Harper, he struck out with the blue bat. But anyway, for the Harpers, this will be child number 4. They already have a son named Crew and 2 daughters named Brooklyn and Cameron. So soon to be a family of 6. Would have been nice if he had homered, though, with the baby blue bat.
Well, either way, congratulations are in order. But tonight we have the NBA's play-in beginning with a pair of games. Meanwhile, in the NHL, just 3 days left until the end of the regular season. How many playoff spots are still up for grabs, though?
Yeah, 3 playoff spots in the NHL. You got 1 in the Eastern Conference with 2 teams still alive. That's Montreal and Columbus. Now, the Blue Jackets are playing tonight. They need to win. If they lose, Montreal gets a spot. Now, in the Western Conference, you've got 2 teams alive. You've got 3 teams alive vying for 2 playoff spots. You've got Minnesota, Calgary, and St. Louis. Now, Calgary needs to win, and they need the other 2 to lose because they are trailing the other 2 there in the playoff spots. Now, Calgary, if they win and those other 2 lose, Calgary also will play Thursday night, needing a win there also to get into the playoffs. Now, in the NBA, you've got Atlanta versus Orlando in the first 7th versus 8th place game tonight. Now, if you remember, the winner automatically advances to the playoffs as the number 7 seed, and they will play the NBA defending champion Boston Celtics. Meanwhile, Golden State plays Memphis in the other 7th versus 8th place game tonight. The winner of that will advance as the 7th seed in the playoffs. They will play the number 2 seed Houston Rockets, which I'm sure they would much rather play them than the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have the best record in the NBA, the 6th best record in NBA history. So that is what's going on tonight.
A lot happening. Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Maher. Good night.